Okay, so at this point, you should have already finished part one. And so if you haven't watched part one, please watch that first. In part one, we wrote just a basic format date function. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we are going to work on part two, which is rewriting our code to take arguments. Okay, the arguments that it's going to take are a date object and a target ID. So this function is great. It works, it does what we're supposed to do, but it's pretty inflexible. So it's always going to create a date object based on the time and date right now. And it's always going to format it a certain way. It's always going to post it into test ID. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're gonna play around with writing a function that allows us to take different dates and times, so different date objects, and post them into different places within our code. So I'm going to go ahead just for ease. I'm going to take part two, and I'm going to go ahead and put it above part one so that we can kind of see it a little bit better. Okay, so in part two, we are going to write a function similar to format date, but this function is going to take arguments. So we're going to start the same way, function format date two, so our second function, and give us some curly braces. And what this function will do, again, remember we talked about good programming practice is to add comments so we know what our function is doing. It's going to format info about the given date and then insert that the string into the document. Okay? All right. So the difference between format date and format date two is that format date two is going to take two arguments. So it is going to take a date object and it is going to take a target ID. Okay? So this is pretty cool because what it will let us do is use this function multiple times, but for different date objects and different target IDs within our HTML. All right, so let's look at what this looks like. So formatting info about the day, same thing, var the date equals date object, oops, dot get date. And notice about this, we can use the variable the date inside format date two, even though we used it in format date one, because it's a different function, and so the variable the date does not yet exist within format date two. Okay. Now, what we're saying in this line of code is, hey function, take this date object that we're passing to you, so we're giving you a date object, and get the date from that date object. Get the date, so the day, so like the 6th of April, like today, right? From this date object, okay? We're gonna do the same thing for the month, equals date obj, oops, dot get month, var the year, oops, equals date obj dot get full year. And then like we did before, var current date equals the month plus slash plus the date plus slash plus the year. Okay, so this is actually the same line of code that we used in format date, the first one, right? So line 30, it is the same as line 45, but it's taking these three variables to build that current date, okay? And then the last thing we're going to do is we are going to print it to our screen. Element by ID, target ID. So this target ID is coming from here, okay? Dot inner HTML equals current, date. All right? Okay. So it actually might look less complex, right, than part one, but it gives us way more flexibility. So let me show you what I mean, okay? So let's do format date 2, and we are going to pass the same information that we used for format date 1. And when we do this, what should happen is it should look exactly the same when I save it and run it, okay? So I'm going to do format date 2, and I'm going to do new date. So I'm creating a new date object, and I am going to print it into this area called test ID. Oops. Okay. All right, ready? Oop, sorry. It did not want us to have a semicolon. It wanted us to have a comma, right? So we talked about this earlier. Arguments are separated by commas, okay? So save it. Oh, we actually end up getting March. Anybody know why? Remember we talked about months start with 0, so we got to add 1. All right, there we go. So it turns out exactly how we want it to because we are giving it the same thing, today's date, and test ID is the location. Now, let me show you why this is so cool. So, like I said, it gives us more flexibility. So let's say we want to print something, ID equals, and we'll call this my birthday. Okay. So we've got a div called my birthday. And now we actually can run this function again. So format date 2. And I am going to pass it my birthday. So ready? New date. And then I'm going to give it to 28/1989. Okay, so giving it that information. And I'm going to print it. Oops, this is bad format. Sorry, guys. To the location called my birthday. Okay. So what this should do is when I save this, it should give us the same thing, today's date, and then underneath of it, it should print 2/28/89 with in this area below it. Ready? And there it goes. So using parameters, giving it some arguments or parameters, same thing, arguments and parameters, we can make a function that is more flexible so that we can run the same code multiple times. So now, instead of us having to write all this code, we've done it in one line each time. Okay? All right, that's part 2. Go ahead and stop here. Check to make sure that your code matches my code. Let me expand this so you can see it. Make sure that your code matches my code for function number 2, and then you can resume for part 3.